The chandeliers of Londonderry House dripped with 1,000 points of light, but for Duchess Serafina de Courtenay, the ballroom was a cold Arctic expanse. She was the forgotten Duchess, a widow who had buried herself in the countryside for 5 long years, emerging tonight only at the insistence of her aunt. Society's whispers were a cold wind, but they froze mid-air. The music scratched to a halt. There, at the top of the grand staircase, stood her husband, the man she had personally identified and buried, the man whose death had shattered her life. It was impossible. It was Duke Alistair. 5 years is a lifetime in London society. It is long enough for a scandal to bloom, wilt, and be pressed like a poison flower in a scrapbook of gossip. For Serafina de Courtenay, Duchess of Haverfield, it had been a 5-year sentence of self-imposed exile. Her husband, Alistair, the charming, reckless, and devastatingly handsome Duke, had died in a carriage accident on a rain-slicked country road. The official report was a tragedy. The whispers, however, were far more sinister. They spoke of ruinous gambling debts, of shadowy creditors, of a rumoured mistress in Paris. Some even whispered that the quiet, reserved Duchess, unable to bear the humiliation, had arranged it. Serafina, then only 22, had withered under the speculation. She'd identified the body, or what was left of it, charred and broken, recognizable only by the signet ring on a mangled hand. The ring now hung on a simple gold chain, cold against her skin beneath layers of mourning grey, which she had only just been convinced to abandon. Tonight, she was in defiant, terrifying sapphire blue. "You must, Serafina," her aunt, Lady Beatrice Ashdown, had insisted. Lady Beatrice was a woman built of iron opinions and rigid corsetry. "You are 27, not 100. You are the Duchess of Haverfield. You will not let those harpies in Mayfair turn you into a madwoman in an attic. You will attend the Duke of Londonderry's winter ball. You will hold your head high. You will live." So here she was, at Londonderry House, on Park Lane, feeling less like a living woman and more like a ghost herself. The ballroom was suffocating. The scent of heavy perfume and beeswax, the glint of diamonds on wrinkled necks, the murmur of voices, it all pressed in on her. She had endured the receiving line, the stiff nods, the eyes that lingered too long, searching for cracks in her composure. She found a small alcove, partially hidden by a potted palm, and gripped her chilled champagne flute. "Just 1 hour," she whispered to herself. "1 hour, and then I can return to Blackwood Manor. Back to my books and my dogs. Back to peace. My dear Duchess, you look restored." The oily voice of Lord Pembroke, a man who had once been one of Alistair's chief gambling partners, slithered into her ear. She gave him a look of pure ice. "Lord Pembroke, I am surprised to see you. I had heard you were travelling." Fleeing creditors she left unsaid. Pembroke chuckled, undeterred. "One cannot stay away from London in the winter. The cold, you know. It sharpens the senses." Before she was forced to reply, a sudden electric hush fell over the ballroom. It was not a gradual quieting, but a sharp, collective intake of breath. The orchestra, mid-sweep through a waltz, faltered. Violins screeched into silence. Serafina turned. All eyes were fixed on the grand staircase. A man stood there, poised at the top. He was not announced by the majordomo. He simply appeared. He wore immaculate evening attire, the black wool absorbing the light. He was tall, with the same broad shoulders and impossibly dark, curling hair as Alistair. He descended the first step, the light catching the sharp, aristocratic planes of his face. The same high cheekbones, the The same straight nose, the same cleft in his chin. "Good God," Lord Pembroke whispered, his ruddy face pale as lard. Seraphina's champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the parquet floor. The man's gaze swept the room, dismissive of the staring crowd until it found her. His eyes. They were Alistair's. A deep, piercing grey that had always seemed to hold both a laugh and a storm. He walked toward her, not with Alistair's careless, buoyant stride, but with a slow, deliberate and predatory grace. The crowd parted for him, as if he were the angel of death. He stopped a foot in front of her. The scent of him was different, not Alistair's familiar blend of brandy and sandalwood, but something colder, sharper, like winter air and iron. "Seraphina," he said. The voice was the final, devastating blow. It was Alistair's voice, the same rich timbre, the same cultured accent. Seraphina's hand flew to her throat, her fingers grasping the signet ring through the blue silk. Her heart hammered not with fear, but with a sudden, volcanic rage. How dare he? How dare this thing come here and wear her husband's face? "Who are you?" she demanded. Her voice was a low, shaking thing, but it cut through the silence. The man's lips curved in a smile that was nothing like Alistair's. It was cold, assessing, and utterly without humour. "My apologies, Duchess," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "We have not been formally introduced. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I believe you have something that belongs to me." The silence that followed his words was absolute. It was a vacuum, waiting for the thunderclap. Seraphina did not faint. The women of her era were trained to faint at the slightest shock, but Seraphina was made of sterner stuff. The blood in her veins had turned to ice water, and with it came a chilling clarity. This was not a ghost. Ghosts did not have the sheer, physical presence of the man standing before her. Ghosts did not smell of iron. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "You have the advantage of me, and you are mistaken. I have nothing that could possibly belong to you." The man, Thorne, tilted his head. The movement was so painfully familiar, it felt like a knife twisting in her ribs. "I disagree, Your Grace. You hold the entire Haverfield estate, an estate built on a lie, an estate that rightfully belongs to another." A gasp rippled through the room. Lord Londonderry, their host, finally galvanized into action. He was a tall, imposing man with a formidable political career. He began to move through the crowd, his face a mask of thunder. "Sir," Lord Londonderry said, his voice booming, "you will identify yourself properly or you will be removed. This is a private home." Marcus Thorne didn't turn to face the Duke. His grey eyes remained locked on Seraphina. "My apologies, Lord Londonderry. As I said, I am Marcus Thorne. I am an associate of your guest, Lord Pembroke." All eyes swiveled to Pembroke, who looked as if he were about to be sick. I know him from a club," Pembroke stammered. He is an American investor. I had no idea, I swear." "An American," Seraphina repeated, tasting the word. It explained the slightest, almost imperceptible flatness to his vowels. "An American who happens to wear my late husband's face. A bold trick, sir." "It is no trick," Thorne said, his voice lowering, intended for her alone. "But it is, as you say, a bold move. One must be bold when one has been wronged. Seraphina, my dear, come away." Lady Beatrice had finally pushed through, her face ashen. She seized Seraphina's arm. "This man is mad. He is an impostor, a cruel, monstrous—" "I am precisely what I appear to be, Lady Ashdown," Thorne interrupted, his tone sharp. a man looking for what is his. "And what is that?" Serafina demanded, pulling her arm free from her aunt's grip. She would not be led away. She would not be a forgotten Duchess hiding in the shadows. Not from this. "Justice," he said simply. Before she could form a reply, two of Lord Londonderry's footmen, burly men hired for just such disturbances, flanked Mr. Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," Lord Londonderry said, his voice final, "you will leave. Now." Thorne looked at the footman, then back at Serafina. He gave that cold, chilling smile again. "As you wish. But this is far from over, Duchess." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a simple, white calling card. He did not hand it to her, but instead placed it on the small table next to the shattered champagne glass. Then, with the entire ballroom watching, he turned on his heel and walked calmly out of the room, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. The moment he was gone, the room erupted. The dam of whispers broke, and a flood of speculation, outrage, and morbid excitement filled the air. Serafina stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the calling card. Marcus Thorne, The Albany, London. Lady Beatrice was fanning herself, her iron composure finally cracking. Scandalous, utterly depraved, to impersonate the dead. He should be arrested. "Serafina, we are leaving." "No," Serafina said. "What?" "No." She turned to her aunt, her eyes blazing with a cold fire that had not been there an hour before. "I have spent 5 years running from whispers. I will not run from this. I will not be the forgotten Duchess any longer." She bent, ignoring the gasps, and picked up the calling card, her kid-gloved fingers closing around the sharp rectangle of pasteboard. She would not run. She would fight. She turned to Lord Londonderry. "My apologies for the scene, Your Grace. It seems my return to society is more eventful than I had planned." "My dear Duchess," he said, his expression softening with pity, "the apology is all mine. That man will never be admitted to this house again." "On the contrary," Serafina said, her voice clear and carrying, "I fully intend to speak with Mr. Thorne. I am going to find out exactly who he is and what game he is playing." She turned and walked, not out of the ballroom, but through it, her head held high, the sapphire silk of her gown whispering over the floor. The whispers died as she passed. For the first time in 5 years, they were not looking at her with pity or suspicion. They were looking at her with something akin to awe. The ghost had returned, but it wasn't her husband. It was her. The following morning found Serafina not in her drawing room, receiving concerned callers, but in the dusty, imposing offices of Gray's Inn, seated opposite Mr. Bartholomew Pendleton. Pendleton had been the de Courtenay family solicitor for 30 years. He was a small, dry man who seemed to be composed entirely of parchment and sealing wax. He had managed Alistair's affairs and, subsequently, Serafina's. He had been the one to confirm the utter ruin of the estate, the one who had advised her to close up the London house and retreat to Blackwood Manor, where the cost of living was minimal. "Mr. Thorne," Pendleton repeated, steepling his thin fingers. He had listened to her account of the ball without a flicker of expression. An American, posing as the late Duke. It is distasteful. A crude attempt at extortion, no doubt. He seeks to profit from your shock, Your Grace. He was not just posing, Mr. Pendleton, Serafina insisted, leaning forward. He was identical, not similar, identical. Down to the way his left eyebrow quirks when he is assessing. Pendleton coughed, a dry, dusty sound. A remarkable coincidence of genetics, perhaps. These things happen. "I do not believe in coincidences of this magnitude," Serafina said sharply. "I want you to investigate him. Find out where he comes from, who his associates are, and what he wants. "Your Grace," Pendleton said, his tone placating, "a costly and, if I may be so bold, fruitless endeavor. To engage with him is to validate his absurd claims. He will feed on the attention. The best course of action is silence. Ignore him. He will disappear. He mentioned Lord Pembroke." At this, Pendleton's eyes did flicker. "Did he?" Pembroke introduced him as an American investor. Pembroke was one of Alistair's worst influences. Is it possible Alistair owed this Mr. Thorne money? "Impossible," Pendleton said, a fraction too quickly. "I am intimately familiar with the late Duke's debts. They were extensive. But they were all local. Gambling houses, tailors, other noblemen. There was no American investor. The estate's finances are, as you know, quite transparent." "Are they?" Serafina asked. The question hung in the air. "When Alistair died, you told me he was ruined, that Blackwood Manor itself was mortgaged to the hilt." "Correct. It was a tragedy upon a tragedy," Pendleton said, shaking his head. "And yet for 5 years I have lived comfortably. The staff has been paid. The roof has been repaired. Where has this money come from?" "Your Grace, you underestimate your own parsimony," the solicitor said with a thin smile. "By closing the London house and living with a skeleton staff, you have managed to float. The estate is not profitable, but it is surviving. Thanks to your prudence." Serafina stared at him. It didn't feel right. It had never felt right. But what choice did she have but to believe him? "Investigate Mr. Thorne, Pendleton," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Find out who he is. That is all." Pendleton bowed his head. "As you wish, Your Grace." Serafina left the office feeling deeply unsatisfied. Pendleton's advice, to hide, to be silent, was the same advice he had given her 5 years ago. It was the advice that had turned her into the forgotten Duchess. She did not return to her townhouse. Instead, she instructed her driver to take her to a different address, one she had not visited in 5 years, the Haverfield townhome in Belgrave Square. It was a cold, imposing building, its windows shuttered, its stone facade grey with London grime. She used her old key. The air inside was frigid and smelled of dust and decay. Pendleton had advised her to sell it, but she had refused. It was the last piece of something. She went straight to Alistair's study. It was exactly as he had left it. A half-finished glass of brandy sat on the desk, now just a sticky brown ring. She opened his desk drawers. They were filled with what she expected: summonses from creditors, racing forms, invitations to parties, a few impassioned letters from ladies she refused to dignify with a name. But in the back of the bottom drawer, beneath a false bottom she hadn't known was there, she found a small, locked cash box. It was a simple thing, one she could easily pry open with a letter opener. Inside there was no cash. There was only a stack of letters, tied with a black ribbon. They were not from a mistress. The handwriting was Alistair's, but they were not addressed to anyone she knew. They were addressed to Thomas. She sank into the desk chair, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the window. She untied the ribbon. "My dearest Thomas," the first one began, dated 6 years ago. "I received your letter. I cannot express my joy that you are well, though the circumstances you describe in America sound harsh. I am sending what I can. It is not as much as I would like. Pendleton is a dragon with the ledgers." Another, a year later. "Thomas, you must not speak of coming here. It is impossible. Father's will was explicit. You know the disgrace of your birth was his obsession. He would sooner see the title burn than have you, his bastard twin, set foot in England." Serafina's breath caught. bastard twin. Alistair had a twin brother, an illegitimate one, sent away to America. She read on, her hands shaking. The letters painted a grim picture. Alistair was not just corresponding with his brother, he was conspiring with him. The last letter was dated 1 week before the accident. Thomas, it is done. The plan is in motion. The debts are too great. A man I borrowed from. He is not like the others. He is not a fool I can charm. He is threatening Serafina. I cannot allow that. The accident is set for next week. Pendleton has arranged a suitable body from the morgue, a poor soul with no family. By the time they find the carriage, I will be on a ship to New York. You must come to England at once. Use the name we discussed, Marcus Thorne. Go to Pendleton. He will have your share of the funds from the final asset liquidation. We will be free, brother. Both of us. I will see you in New York. Serafina dropped the letter. Alistair wasn't dead. He had staged it. He had fled. He had left her to face the scandal, the whispers, the ruin, and the dangerous man he feared. And Marcus Thorne was his twin brother, Thomas, the ghost in the ballroom. But the plan had gone wrong. Alistair had never made it to New York. And Thomas was here. And he didn't just want money. He wanted justice. He thought she was the one who had wronged him. The air in the dusty study felt thick, unbreathable. Serafina sat for a long time, the letters clutched in her hand. The shock was a physical blow, followed by a wave of cold, clarifying fury. Alistair, her charming, laughing, careless husband. He hadn't just been reckless. He had been monstrous. He had abandoned her. He had faked his own death, planted a body, and left her to grieve a man who was, in all likelihood, living a new life in America. He had let her become the forgotten Duchess, a pariah haunted by his supposed death, while he was free. And Thomas, Marcus Thorne, was his accomplice. But why was Thomas here, at this ball, making this public scene? The letter said to go to Pendleton. It said Pendleton had the money. Unless Pendleton never gave it to him. She had to see him, not as the Duchess, but as a woman seeking answers. She still had his card. The Albany, a very expensive, very exclusive set of bachelor's apartments. She did not go home to change. She did not tell her aunt. She took a cab directly to Piccadilly. The Albany was quiet and intensely private. Her title was enough to get her past the porter. She was announced, and a moment later she was being shown into a large, well-appointed drawing room. He was standing by the window, looking out over the street. He was dressed simply, but the cut of his dark wool suit was perfect. He looked even more like Alistair in the daylight. It was agonizing. "Duchess," he said, turning. His face was grim. "I am surprised. I expected a solicitor, not the lady herself. I am not here to negotiate, Mr. Thorne. Or should I call you Thomas de Courtenay?" His bloodshot, Alistair grey eyes widened, just fractionally, the first genuine crack in his iron facade. "How?" She threw the bundle of letters onto the mahogany table between them. "I found these, in his desk, his bastard twin. The plan to fake his death. The body from the morgue. The escape to New York." Thomas stared at the letters, his face hardening into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. But it wasn't directed at her. "So you knew," he whispered. "You knew all along." "I knew nothing," Serafina cried, the betrayal of 5 years erupting from her. "I found these an hour ago. I thought he was dead. I grieved for him. I faced the creditors and the whispers that I had him murdered, while you and he—" Thomas looked up, and the hatred in his eyes was replaced by a dawning, terrible confusion. You truly didn't know?" I truly didn't. He sank into a chair, running a hand through his dark hair. Alistair's gesture, but filled with a weariness Alistair had never possessed. "This changes nothing," he said, his voice flat. "It only changes the target of my inquiries." "What do you mean?" "What happened? The letter said you were to meet Pendleton, that Alistair was fleeing to New York." Thomas let out a short, bitter laugh. "Alistair never made it to New York. I arrived in England 3 days after the accident. I went to Pendleton, just as the letter instructed. I used the name Marcus Thorne." "And?" "And Pendleton told me I was mad. He said he'd never heard of me. He'd never heard of a Thomas. He showed me the official coroner's report. He showed me the Duke's signet ring, the one they recovered from the ashes. He told me my brother was dead." Seraphina's blood ran cold. "The ring, but I have the ring. It's here." She pulled the chain from her dress. The heavy gold ring, blackened by fire but unmistakable, lay in her palm. Thomas stared at it. He showed me one just like it. He said you had it. He said, oh God." "What did he say, Thomas?" "He said you were the one. He told me you had discovered Alistair's plan to flee, that you were enraged he was taking the last of the assets and leaving you with the debts. He said you were the dangerous man Alistair mentioned in his letters, that you had intercepted him, had him murdered, and made the fake accident a real one. He said you bribed the coroner and kept the real ring as a trophy." Seraphina felt the floor tilt beneath her. "He framed me. He painted you as a black widow," Thomas said, his voice raw. "He told me you were living in seclusion, pretending to be a grieving widow, while secretly controlling the entire vast fortune you had murdered my brother for." "Fortune?" Seraphina laughed, a sound bordering on hysteria. "He told me the estate was ruined, that I was practically a pauper. He's been paying me a small, carefully managed allowance from what he called prudent investments, just enough to keep Blackwood solvent." The two of them stared at each other, the ghost and the widow. Two victims of the same elaborate lie. "Pendleton," Seraphina whispered, the name tasting like ash. It was always Pendleton. "Alistair trusted him," Thomas said. "He wrote that Pendleton arranged the body, but he didn't. He arranged the murder. He killed Alistair," Seraphina realized, "to stop him from fleeing with the assets. Then he told me the estate was ruined, so I would retreat and leave him in sole control. And he told you I was the killer, to set you on me, perhaps hoping we would destroy each other while he pulled the strings." "He has been liquidating the Haverfield estate for 5 years, Thomas said, his voice deadly. "All of it. The mines in Wales, the properties in Scotland, the London real estate. He's been feeding you scraps while he embezzles a fortune." "He is the Baron," Seraphina said, quoting Alistair's letter. "The man Alistair feared. It was never an outsider. It was his own solicitor." The silence in the room was heavy, filled with the ghosts of 2 brothers and 5 stolen years. "He underestimated us," Seraphina said, her voice quiet but made of steel. "He underestimated the forgotten Duchess and the bastard twin." Thomas looked at her, his grey eyes, his eyes, not Alistair's, filled with a new, burning light. "He did. And now, he's going to pay for it." The alliance was forged. It was not one of friendship, not yet. It was a partnership born of mutual betrayal and a raw, shared need for justice. "We have no proof," Seraphina stated, pacing the apartment at the Albany. "It is my word against his word, the word of a 30-year family solicitor, against the hysterical widow, and a man who bears a shocking resemblance to her late husband. We will be called mad. He will have us committed." He has proof, Thomas said. A man like Pendleton. He is meticulous. He is arrogant. He would never destroy the records of his own brilliance. He will have ledgers, a private set, detailing every transaction, every shilling he has stolen. His office at Gray's Inn, Serafina said. It's impenetrable. He has a safe. I've seen it. He keeps the more sensitive family documents there. Then we must get into his office, and into that safe. How? Serafina stopped pacing. I cannot simply ask him for the key. He's already suspicious. My visit this morning, asking questions about the estate's finances, he will be on his guard. We don't ask. We use the one thing we have that he doesn't expect. You. Me. You are still his client, Thomas said, a calculating look entering his eyes. You are the Duchess of Haverfield. He is hosting his annual client dinner in 2 days. I saw the announcement in the paper. At his home in Mayfair. It is for his most important accounts. I was invited, Serafina said, remembering the card she had tossed, unopened, onto her desk. I was not planning to attend. You are now, Thomas said. You will attend. You will be the perfect, grateful, forgotten Duchess. Perhaps even a little frightened by my appearance at the ball. You will lean on him for support. You will keep him occupied. His house will be full of guests, but his office at Gray's Inn will be empty. And you? And I, Thomas said, am very good at opening locks. Alistair and I, we may have been raised on different continents, but we shared certain talents. The plan was simple, dangerously simple. 2 nights later, Serafina found herself ascending the steps to Bartholomew Pendleton's grand Mayfair home. She was dressed in black velvet, the picture of sombre elegance. She had even feigned a slight tremor in her hands. Pendleton met her at the door, his dry face wreathed in a solicitous smile. Your Grace, I am so relieved to see you. After that dreadful business at the ball, I was worried. That is why I am here, Mr. Pendleton, Serafina said, allowing a slight wobble into her voice. She placed her gloved hand on his arm. That man, Mr. Thorne, he looked so like... I feel I am not safe. I feel I must rely on you, my oldest friend, more than ever. Pendleton visibly preened. The forgotten Duchess was no threat. She was a frightened bird running back to her cage. Of course, Your Grace. You are perfectly safe. I have already made inquiries. The man is a known charlatan. He will be dealt with. Come, let me get you a sherry. He led her into the salon, populated by a dozen of London's wealthiest and most titled citizens. He kept her firmly at his side, introducing her, showing her off, the perfect emblem of his firm's loyalty and discretion. As dinner began, Serafina felt her stomach clench. Thomas was moving now. He would be at Gray's Inn, picking the lock on the heavy oak door. She forced herself to make small talk, to eat, to smile wanly, when Pendleton offered a toast. An hour passed, then 2. The tension was becoming unbearable. Meanwhile, across London, Thomas de Courtenay worked in the dark. The outer lock was simple. The inner office, however, was a different matter. Pendleton was paranoid. It took Thomas 20 precious minutes to disable the new, American-made lock on the office door. He lit a single, small lamp. The office was exactly as Serafina had described. And there, behind a heavy painting of a hunting scene, was the safe. It was a large, black, iron beast. Thomas examined the dial. It was complex. He had no hope of cracking it. Think, Thomas, he muttered. Alistair always said, the man is arrogant, vain. He looked around the desk. Papers, neatly stacked, a calendar, a small framed photograph of no one. It was a picture of the office itself. No. He looked closer. It was a photograph of Pendleton standing in this office, taken years ago. He was younger, but just as dry, holding a large bound book. The day the office opened, perhaps? He looked at the desk calendar. June 4th, office anniversary. He went to the safe. He tried the combination. 0604. Nothing. He tried again. Pendleton's birthday. He didn't know it. He looked back at the desk, at the blotter. It was clean. Too clean. He lifted it. Nothing. He ran his fingers along the underside of the desk drawer. Taped to the wood, his fingers brushed a small, flat key. A key? For a combination safe? He looked back at the safe. It was a dual lock, a key and a combination. Pendleton, in his ultimate paranoia, had created a system only he could open, but the key was useless without the numbers. He stared at the safe, the manufacturer's plate, Chatham and Sons. His mind raced. Pendleton, Alistair. What had Alistair said in his letters? Pendleton is a dragon with the ledgers. He thought back to Seraphina. He told me the estate was ruined. The date of Alistair's death. October 21st. He put the key in the lock. He turned it. Then he went to the dial. 10261. He heard a heavy clunk. The handle turned. The safe door swung open. It was not gold or jewels inside. It was ledgers. Dozens of them. One set, bound in green, was labelled Haverfield Estate. Official. Another set, bound in blood-red leather, was hidden at the bottom. The first one was labelled Haverfield Estate. Private. Thomas opened it. His hands were steady. Page after page, the sale of the Welsh mines, the transfer of funds to an account in Zurich, the sale of the Scottish lands, another transfer, the name on the account, BP Enterprises, and then a single page, a memo, payment to J. Riggs, carriage disposal, one body, $1,000, the proof. He took only the red ledger. He closed the safe, reset the lock, replaced the key, and tidied the office. He left as silently as he had come. Back in Mayfair, Seraphina was nursing her third glass of untouched sherry. Her nerves were shredded. Just as the ladies were about to retire, the butler entered and whispered in Pendleton's ear. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace," Pendleton said, his smile tight. "A small matter with the staff." He walked out. He was gone for 10 minutes. When he returned, his face was the colour of old parchment. The smile was gone. He walked directly to Seraphina. "Your Grace," he said, his voice a low hiss. "A word. In my study." The blood drained from Seraphina's face. He knew. Something had gone wrong. Thomas had been caught. She stood, her legs trembling, but her head high. "Of course, Mr. Pendleton." She followed him out of the salon, the eyes of the other guests boring into her back. He led her down a short hall to his private study. It was a smaller, richer version of his office. He closed the door and turned the key in the lock. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Pendleton?" Seraphina demanded, forcing a note of outrage into her voice. "I have just received a message," Pendleton said, his voice shaking with a rage he could no longer conceal. "My office at Gray's Inn. It was broken into this evening." "Broken into?" Seraphina feigned horror. "My goodness, were you robbed?" He was clever. He left no sign, but he was there. I have systems, silent alarms. My night watchman. He found a scuff on the floor that was not there this afternoon. And I know, what he was there for. He advanced on her, his small frame vibrating with fury. "It was him, wasn't it? Your ghost, your American imposter. He was at the ball, and suddenly you appear at my office asking questions you have not asked in 5 years. You, the docile, grieving widow. And tonight you appear at my home, clinging to my arm, distracting me. It was you. You've been working with him." The mask was off. This was not the dry, kindly solicitor. This was the Baron. "I don't know what you're talking about," Serafina said, backing away until she hit the cold marble of the fireplace. "Don't you?" he sneered. "He's Thomas de Courtenay, isn't he? The bastard twin. Alistair's little secret." "Oh yes, I knew all about Thomas. I read their letters. I knew everything." Alistair trusted you," Serafina whispered, the horror of it settling on her. "Alistair was a fool," Pendleton spat. "A charming, profligate fool. He was running the de Courtenay name into the ground. He was going to take what was left of the estate and flee to America with his bastard brother and leave me to clean up the mess." "So you killed him," Serafina said. It was not a question. The admission hung in the air. Pendleton's eyes were wide, manic. He had crossed a line, and he knew it. "He was weak," Pendleton hissed. "He would have been caught. I simply expedited the inevitable. I staged the accident he planned. I just made sure he was in it. The body from the morgue, a pathetic story. I used a debtor of my own, a man who owed me thousands. It was tidy." "And me?" Serafina asked, her voice deadly quiet. "You told me he was ruined. You left me with nothing. You framed me to his brother. You were happy in the countryside," he shrieked. "You hated London. You hated the whispers. I gave you peace. I gave you an escape. I managed the estate as it should have been managed, by someone with vision, with strength. You mean you stole it? I earned it," he roared, seizing a heavy brass letter opener from his desk. "I spent 30 years watching that family, your husband, his father, squander a fortune. I preserved it. It is mine." He lunged at her. Serafina cried out, stumbling back. The study door burst open. The lock splintered. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. Beside him stood their host from the winter ball, the Duke of Londonderry, and 2 uniformed Bow Street runners. Pendleton froze, the letter opener held high. His face crumpled in disbelief. "How?" he whimpered. Thomas stepped into the room, the red leather-bound ledger in his hand. "While you were receiving your message, Pendleton, I was delivering mine. To Lord Londonderry, in his capacity as a magistrate." Lord Londonderry looked at Pendleton with utter disgust. "Bartholomew, I have just spent 10 minutes reading the most appalling confession of theft, fraud, and murder. And now, I believe I have just witnessed an attempted one." Serafina looked at Thomas. He had never intended for her to be in danger. He had used her as a distraction, yes, but he had brought the law with him as a shield. They are lying!" Pendleton babbled, dropping the letter opener. It clattered on the floor. "It's a fabrication. That thing, he is an imposter." "The ledger, Mr. Pendleton," Thomas said, tossing it onto the desk. "Your private ledger, with the Zurich account numbers, and the payment for the carriage disposal. I believe your game is over." The Bow Street runners seized Pendleton. The solicitor, the man of parchment and wax, finally dissolved. He began to sob, a high S, pathetic sound. "You ruined it," he screamed at Serafina as they dragged him away. "It was perfect. You were forgotten. You should have stayed forgotten." The study was silent, save for Pendleton's fading cries. Serafina was shaking, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak. Thomas moved to her side. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a solid, grounding presence. "It's over, Serafina," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up at him. The face was Alistair's, but the man was entirely different. Alistair had run from danger. Thomas had walked directly into it. Alistair had abandoned her. Thomas had saved her. "The ghost," she whispered. "He's gone," Thomas replied. "All of them are." The arrest of Bartholomew Pendleton detonated in London society with the force of a cannon. It was not merely a scandal, it was a societal earthquake. The Times and the Morning Post fell over themselves to report the lurid details. "The Pendleton affair, solicitor, murderer, baron of deceit," screamed one headline. "The ghost of Haverfield, bastard twin unmasks killer," declared another. In a matter of days, Seraphina de Courtenay was transformed. The whispers that had haunted her for 5 years, the pitying glances, the veiled accusations, the cruel speculation, vanished. They were replaced by a new, more potent kind of murmur. She was no longer the forgotten Duchess. A week after the arrest, Seraphina ordered her carriage, not for a quiet trip to the bookseller, but for a drive through Hyde Park, at precisely 4 o'clock. Her aunt, Lady Beatrice, clutched her hand as the carriage rolled to a stop by the Serpentine. "My dear, are you certain?" The stares. "Let them stare," Seraphina said. Her voice was quiet, but the tremor that had lived there for 5 years was gone. She descended from the carriage, dressed not in morning grey or defiant sapphire, but in a deep, rich emerald velvet. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Lord Pembroke, the man who had first introduced Thomas as an investor, was holding court by the rail. He saw her, and his ruddy face went the colour of bleached linen. He bowed so low it was almost comical. The ton parted for her. The women who had cut her, the men who had pitied her, they now watched with a mixture of fear and profound awe. They saw the woman who had lived for 5 years as a pariah, who had walked into a ballroom and faced a ghost, who had entered a lion's den and emerged with the lion's head. They called her the Iron Duchess. Seraphina did not feel like iron. She felt as though she had been hollowed out by fire, and what was left behind was not metal, but something harder, clearer, like glass. She had been invisible, and now she was anything but. The legal and financial resolutions were, by contrast, blessedly dull. She had hired a new, brutally efficient team of solicitors. The Zurich accounts were frozen. The Welsh mines, the Scottish lands, the London properties. Pendleton's liquidation had been systematic, but he had, in his arrogance, kept meticulous records. "The bulk of the fortune is recoverable, Your Grace," the new solicitor, a pragmatic man named Davies, explained. "It will take time, but the Haverfield estate is not just solvent. It is one of the wealthiest in England." He cleared his throat, shuffling his papers. "There is, however, the complex matter of Mr. Thomas de Courtenay." "There is nothing complex about it, Mr. Davies," Seraphina stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Mr. de Courtenay is my late husband's brother. He has been defrauded just as I have. He is to be considered a principal in this recovery." Davies blinked, surprised by her vehemence. "As you wish, Your Grace." But the true resolution could not happen in a solicitor's office. She had sent him a note. Not to the Albany, but to Haverfield House, the grand, cold townhouse in Belgrave Square, which was now a hive of activity. Dust sheets were being burned. Windows were thrown open to the winter air. The scent of beeswax and lemon oil replaced the smell of decay. Thomas arrived, not as a ghost, but as a man. He stood in the grand foyer, watching as footmen carried a shrouded piece of furniture. He looked uncomfortable, his dark American-cut suit a stark contrast to the gilt and marble. "Thomas," she said. He turned. Every time she saw him it was a fresh shock. The face was Alistair's, the way the light caught his dark hair, the shape of his mouth, but the presence was entirely different. Alistair had filled a room with careless, demanding light. Thomas was a grounding force, solid and still. She led him to the study, Alistair's study. She had already had his desk removed. "The solicitors have given me the preliminary reports," she began, standing by the fireplace. "The estate is mine, legally, unequivocally. As Alistair's widow, I am his sole heir. Your status gives you no claim." Thomas nodded. His face was grim. "I expected as much. I am not here for a handout, Serafina." "I know," she said. "Which is why I find the legal position unacceptable." He looked up, his grey eyes, sharp with surprise. "Pendleton stole 5 years from me," she said, her voice low. "He stole a brother from you. He stole a name from you. I cannot repay that, but I can restore what is yours by blood." She walked to the new, simpler desk she had installed and picked up a sheaf of documents. "These are the deeds to Blackwood Manor and all the adjoining lands in Wales. They are yours." He stared at the papers, then at her. He didn't move. "Blackwood? That is your home, the place I hid," she finished. "It was my prison, Thomas, a beautiful, quiet, cold prison where I went to be forgotten. I will never live there again. But it is de Courtenay land. It needs a master, not a ghost, not a grieving widow. It needs you." He walked to the window, staring out at the London street. Alistair used to write about it. He said it was the one place he felt real. "He was a fool," Serafina said, the words sharp and sudden, surprising them both. Thomas turned. "Yes," he said quietly. "He was." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so like Alistair's it made her heart ache. "But he was my brother. And I will not take your home as a payment." "Then what will you take?" she demanded, frustration rising. "You are a de Courtenay. All of this. It is your birthright as much as it was his." "No, it wasn't." His voice was rough, the first crack in his iron control. "My birthright was a ship to America, and a letter branding me a bastard. Alistair's birthright was this." He gestured around the magnificent room. "I am not him, Serafina. I am not the charming aristocrat. I am the man who had to build a life from mud. I will not be your manager. I will not be your project, and I will not take your charity." "It is not charity, it is justice." "Then let's speak of justice," he said, stepping closer. "The estate is wealthy, yes, but it is broken. Its reputation is in tatters. Its assets are scattered. Its tenants are confused. You are the Iron Duchess, but you cannot run this alone. You need someone who knows how to build. Someone who knows how to fight." Her breath caught. "What are you proposing?" "Alistair ran," Thomas said, his voice dropping. "He ran from his debts, he ran from his responsibilities, and he ran from you. I am not a runner. I am proposing a partnership, not a manager. A partner. You are the name. You are the Iron Duchess. I am the American, the builder, the bastard who knows how to wring a profit from stone. We will rebuild the house of Haverfield. Together." He stood before her, not as a ghost, not as a replacement, but as himself. For the first time, Serafina truly saw him. The face was the same, but the man was Alistair's opposite. Where Alistair was weak, Thomas was strong. Where Alistair was careless, Thomas was deliberate. Where Alistair had abandoned her, Thomas had stood with her. "A partnership," she repeated, tasting the word. It felt solid, real. "The forgotten Duchess and the bastard twin," he said, a small wry smile touching his lips. It was nothing like Alistair's grin. It was weary and wise and real. London won't know what hit it. A slow, genuine smile, her first in 5 years, rose to Seraphina's face. The ghosts were finally gone. The cold, suffocating fog of the past 5 years was lifting. She extended her gloved hand, not in supplication, but as an equal. A partnership, then. Mr. de Courtenay. He took her hand. His grip was warm and firm. Thomas, he corrected her, his gaze holding hers, promising not a fairy tale, but a fight. Thomas, she agreed, and for the first time, she was not a widow looking at a ghost. She was a woman looking at her future. The ghost of the past is gone, but the future is unwritten. Seraphina and Thomas, the Duchess and the ghost, have faced down the man who tried to destroy them both. They have reclaimed their names, their fortune, and their lives. But what happens now? Can a partnership forged in such a dark, dramatic fire ever turn into something more? Can the Iron Duchess ever allow her heart to trust again, especially with a man who wears her late husband's face? The story of the House of Haverfield is far from over. If you were captivated by Seraphina's journey from a forgotten widow to a woman of power, please show your support. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone else who loves a dramatic twist. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more stories of intrigue, betrayal, and real-life drama coming your way. Don't miss a single one.